with it. So anyhow, here we go. All right, welcome back to the second hour of CROW777 Radio, what is likely to be episode 13, although it should have been scheduled for episode 15. I have Robert BASSANO, and we're going to pick up again, having just declared that the Hubble Space Telescope is nonsense, absolute nonsense. And what Robert has done here has brought the first quantifiable data that backs what I have been saying for quite some time. But anyhow, we're going to jump in here now and talk a bit about the moon. And it's a bit astonishing. And while I'm not sure how much, maybe none of the source is going to get revealed that is the basis for this conversation yet, we'll put this caveat. Maybe as time progresses, Robert will release that data or information that at least begins to better fill in the blanks about the origins of what we're going to talk about. But as many have followed me understand, I initially, I don't know how long it's been now, a couple years anyhow, have been, maybe even 3, have been stating that the moon and the sun are not the distance we've been told. At one point, I did a thought experiment using Google Earth to demonstrate that the listed naked eye crater, Aristarchus, which is less than 40 miles in diameter, is supposedly visible to us from almost nearly 250,000 miles away. Using Google Earth, I demonstrated that at 40,000 feet, we can no longer see an object that is 40 miles in diameter. But anyhow, Robert, welcome back to the second hour.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so earlier today when I first met you, having had a friend track you down after I heard the tape of your conversation with the gentleman who spent 20-some years of his life working at Sophia, we were talking about a very interesting piece of data which starts to back up my statement that the moon is not the distance away from us we've been told it is.
Yeah, and without having to go over the data that I actually have, it's not my data, it actually belongs to a particular organization I'm not going to mention right now, but they have the capability to view objects in the nighttime sky, in the clearest skies on Earth. But doing the collateral research, I confirmed some of the things that I had been saying before, when I was putting out videos, that when you take the data from NASA claiming that the surface temperature of the moon is a consistent, somewhere around 250 degrees in the sunlight and minus 250 degrees in the shade on the dark side, I said, okay, wait a minute, that temperature is consistent. So based on some other data that I got regarding atmospheric sciences, because they send up sounding rockets, all sorts of devices up on balloons to gauge, what the temperatures are from the troposphere all the way up to the thermosphere, okay? And then beyond that, I just learned yesterday that they don't even use the term exosphere, they use heliosphere.
Which is very telling, because to call something the exosphere implies that it is outside or in space. Yeah. And then when you turn around and call it the heliosphere, I mean, what are we talking about? Is that now the track of the sun or something? It makes very little sense.
What it means is that there is no exosphere. It's the heliosphere, and it's the sun projecting its atmospheric layer down, making the thermosphere at the temperatures actually increase the higher you get. So the higher you get, which means the closer you would be getting to the sun, the hotter it's going to get. Yesterday we found out when we had a conversation with the SOHO team that the temperatures about 1 million miles away in the Lagrange zone, they're saying that the temperatures have been recorded around 5,800 degrees Kelvin. So the temperatures of the moon in the daylight, when the moon's shining, and they're saying that the sun is reflecting its light onto the moon, but if you want to get into the whole biblical thing, they're saying that 2 lights were created, one for the day, one for the night. And then I've heard theories from other people saying that somehow there may be a plausibility that the sun is actually recharging the moon to get the moon to light up at night. So I'm looking into that. But with regard to the consistent surface temperatures, which are identical on opposite ends of the spectrum, that temperature is consistent in the middle thermosphere between 150 to 200 kilometers, give or take. Okay? I want to make that clear. Those temperatures are consistent to the middle thermosphere, which is between 150 to 100 to 200 kilometers. Okay?
Okay.
Now, the moon can't be, based on that temperature, the moon can't be at 258,000 miles from the Earth. So when you look at those surface temperatures that NASA's claiming, and you look at what the temperatures are consistent in the thermosphere, based on the data I recovered later from another agency, they shot a laser in 2014 during a supermoon event where the moon was large and it was close, okay?
Yep.
And they confirmed what I thought, that the moon is actually less than 100 miles from the surface of the Earth. So that totally took me for a backward flip, because I had never put out a video saying we never went to the moon. I had been listening to people saying that the moon landings were faked. Stanley Kubrick did it all. They did it on a soundstage. No one's been able to provide any kind of smoking gun for me. But when I started looking at the moon and I confirmed what I had believed, I said, wait a minute. Is it possible they went? Because then I started looking at NASA's footage where they were asked the questions in real time. Remember those interviews that were conducted? Hey, how can you explain how you got through the Van Allen belts? And the astronaut says, well, I don't think we had to ever worry about that. I think somehow we went around them.
Yeah, he didn't even really know.
Yeah.
He didn't know anything about it. It was ridiculousness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then it dawned on me, I'm like, wait a minute. These astronauts are all saying the same thing. And if the Van Allen base is as dangerous as they say they are, and according to the science on the South Atlantic anomaly, there's supposedly the Van Allen belts dip down to 200 to 300 kilometers over in our atmosphere off the coast of Brazil. Wait a minute. The Van Allen belts dip down to 200 to 300 kilometers over the coast of Brazil in the South Atlantic? And they call that the South Atlantic anomaly.
Well, I mean, this all starts to become very ridiculous, because as a former U.S. Marine Corps radio operator, we were trained to bounce radio signals off what's called the ionosphere. I recently went to look up where the ionosphere starts and where it ends, and like everything else, like where space starts, you get all this differing data. But then I got the most up-to-date, supposedly official numbers that they use. And what it said was that the ionosphere, which is charged particles, starts at 30 to 40 miles above sea level. It fluctuates, but it goes out to 1,200 miles. So the supposed ionosphere, which is charged particles, goes into what is supposedly space. And now with what you're pointing out, based on data that these people collect, that would mesh with the Van Allen belt as well. So the Van Allen belt would be not only in space, it would be in our atmosphere, and it would also be going through the thermosphere and part of the ionosphere.
Yeah,
it's all nonsense. I mean,
it's all nonsense. If anything, any argument someone can say is that, hey, this is why they call it science. Everyone's saying different things and discovering we're all trying to put it together to make sense. No, I'm sorry. I don't agree. I'm not going to, don't even push that idea on me, because here's the deal. You got one agency putting out the information, and they're supposed to have access to everything everyone else is doing, and you're supposed to be sharing that information. Don't give me, oh, we're not collaborating as closely as we should be. And with regard to the moon, now I'm thinking, wait a minute. They could have gone to the moon. They could have actually got to the moon. So I never put a video out saying that. But
let me hand you the smoking gun that you're seeking, because you have a very high education and very good math skills. There's a website out there.
Not too high yet.
Well, I'll tell you what. You can deal with what I'm going to hand you here. There's a website called aulis.com, AULIS.com. There's a portion of that website that was posted by a former resident of one of the Ukrainian universities. He's a PhD, and he used parallax method on all the Apollo images, or many of them, to demonstrate that picture that says the mountain range is 5 kilometers behind them is actually only 1,000 feet. And this is using parallax method, which means anyone can take the formula he used. Anyone can take this method any day of the week at their bench, which means the experiment is redoable any day of the week. And what he found and what he illustrates in allis.com is that all of the Apollo images he touched and looked at can be shown to have been shot on a soundstage.
Really?
So, I mean, I
want you to understand, I did say there's a possibility they might have went there. I didn't say that they did. But
right. I would
what I'm saying about the moon is they could have went there. Did they go there? I didn't have enough data to conclusively and definitively say, no, they definitely go. I believe what everyone else is putting out with the data. But there's also data out there for the Naval Research Laboratory. In February of 1954, they conducted upper atmospheric testing, launching rockets based off of the V2 design. And they launched about a dozen rockets to get them to max apogee. And not a single rocket got beyond 73 miles.
There you go. And that sets aside the fact that this is deciding whether or not we went to the moon is a simple deductive reasoning process. And you brilliantly put deductive reasoning and data against the supposed Hubble Space Telescope to demonstrate that it was fraud. If you look at the fact that JFK in the 60s said within this decade we will put a man on the moon and safely return him to Earth in a time where the computing power was less than the average wristwatches these days, they did that in less than 10 years. Matter of fact, I think it was something like 8 years. Now fast forward to the modern era where Bush the Jr. announced we were going to go back to the moon, and it never happened. Not even a step in that direction was made. And then Virgin Galactic came along. I believe Virgin Galactic has been around for about 16 years now. So in the modern age, Virgin Galactic, with the stated mission of simply going to the edge of space and falling back in, not even going into orbit, with modern technology, everything we learned in the 60s, everything that's been learned since the 60s, can't even put a vehicle up to the edge of space and fall it back in after 16 years. And as you just pointed out, those rockets not going above 73 miles begins to illustrate a very strong picture for the fact that there is a hard, fast barrier somewhere around 73 to, I don't know, 90 miles up there. I mean, would you agree with all that?
I'd say around that. I'm saying it's within 100 miles, maybe a little bit more, depending on, the lunar cycle. But it sure as hell ain't beyond 200, 300 miles.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. At one point, I was looking for what's called what's the name of the line again that marks space? I'm sorry, the
Kármán line.
Kármán line, there it is. I was looking for the definitive measure 3 years ago for where space began. And the funny thing was I was getting numbers all over the place, and the lowest numbers were at 60 miles. Was the claim.
That's around the Kármán line.
Yeah, and so, then again, you're looking at the ionosphere, which is charged particles going well into the vacuum of space. Well, how can charged particles be in space? They're particles, which means that's not a vacuum. But I would ask you, in the research that I don't want you to divulge the source until you feel comfortable doing so or not. But how solid do you feel that laser test is marking the distance of the moon on the 2014 supermoon as roughly 99 miles away from us? How accurate do you think that data is going to end up being?
It's extremely accurate because they use that same research facility to shoot laser beams in the nighttime sky, and they say on their own website and on the video they create artificial stars. So if they can create an artificial star that's supposed to be millions of miles away, then they can sure as hell to shoot that same laser at the moon, and they did it. And it was, I'm telling you, I wish I could read it right now, but I'm not ready to put it out there. The moon is not 230 258,000 miles from the surface of the Earth.
No,
And
it's a context thing. We've all been beaten to think and consider things in a certain way in a certain context.
yeah,
And as a person who observed the moon for many thousands of hours, when you understand finally to throw out everything that's been told you and go out and test it for yourself, you begin to realize that it is patently ridiculous that
yeah.
you're looking at Jupiter in the quality image you can get that's
No.
over 400 million miles away. Doesn't
Yeah.
work, and that's what led to the experiment with Google Earth to demonstrate that even at 40,000 miles, that naked eye object called Aristarchus crater is not visible. But I've got to ask you, oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. Where were we going?
Yeah, here's something that's interesting, Crow.
Okay.
We've all seen images of the ISS, and they show photo at a distance of the moon, right? And the moon's really far away.
Yep.
Right? But get this. They're showing, did you ever take notice of the fact that the image they're showing you from the ISS of the moon is below the ISS? Now, some people are going to say, oh yeah, the moon is setting. But get this. Based on what I just told you, the ISS is supposed to be at 245 miles, right?
Yep.
The moon should be within 100, maybe 150 miles. Now you know why they will never pan that camera around in the ISS, because they're afraid one day the moon's just going to come up real fast and they're going to make a mistake and people are going to see it. They're going to be like, whoa, what was that?
Yeah, I kind of feel like we're playing both sides of the fence here, because when we talk in this way, we're making the assumption that there is an ISS there. And I'm
just making the assumption. Yeah.
Right. I think we need to frame this more in a way that demonstrates.
I did a video about the ISS, and that would freak you out for your listeners too, because I actually verified that on NASA's own website, when you go track the ISS, it has the word Zarya in parentheses. So I looked up Zarya. Zarya was the first Russian module launched for the ISS. So the ISS is literally one module. And it's probably 7 modules broken up on balloons, because the oscillation that the ISS supposedly takes, where it rises and lowers in altitude, is the same oscillating elevation and declination activity that a balloon takes. And I have the actual graph data to prove, to compare what the ISS does versus what balloons do, and they do the same exact thing in the thermosphere.
Now that's a damn interesting thing, and here's why. There are some other people who have learned to think like human beings that I follow. Even though he's not very popular and a lot of people like to take issue with him, the Jungle Surfer has said for a long time that it's clear we can see a light up there called the ISS. It's clear we can see the scheduling of it coming around, which is true. I can verify that for myself. But he actually, in one of his videos some years ago, made the statement, how are they doing? I wondered if it could be done with a balloon. And I have been at odds with my own brain trying to figure out how that light is operating up there, knowing damn well there's no ISS to back it. So what you're saying is you can show the same supposed orbital oscillation pattern that a balloon at high altitude has already been clocked doing.
The balloons, they show the actual, I've got the printed data from NASA's Wallet program, and it was dated 2014. They launched a balloon, and it was a 14-day operation. They launched it on the 14th. It went up to 150,000 feet, and then during the evening time, because of, helium expands in hot weather and thermal environments, but then in the evening, the balloon dropped 60 to 80,000 feet, and then during the day, it went back up, and then it dropped again 60 to 80,000, 100,000 feet, went up again, came down, and the ISS is literally, when it makes its orbit supposedly around the Earth, it's literally, when you look at the real-time data on the European Space Agency's website to track the ISS, you will see in just a few minutes, you will see the ISS lose anywhere between 1 to 2 miles of altitude and go back up and come back down and go back up. That is identical to what Antarctic balloon launchers are doing. And they're also launching satellites on balloons, on a 100-foot tether. They bring them up in the sky, they do their thing, they come crashing down on a parachute, they repackage it up and send it back up again. And I contacted some guys who were amateur radio operators. They do nothing but track supposedly space assets. And I contacted a guy overseas and I said, listen, I need you to do me a favor. Here goes 4 supposed satellites in orbit. I want you to get their data. Here's their data. And then I need you to track these for 14 to 35 days. And let me know if after those time, if you've lost a signal, and tell me how long you lost a signal for. And lo and behold, it was the same amount of time that they send up a balloon and then it comes back down.
Wow.
Meaning that when one comes down, they send another one back up. Let me tell you, they spend billions of dollars on the balloon program, and guess what? NASA is actually running short of helium.
Right.
Now, why do they need all that helium for?
The whole world is running short of helium.
Because that's how you got to operate the actual. Google Loon, Loon, describes exactly how the satellite program is actually working for communications. Look at Google Loon.
Describe it.
Here's what Google is describing with their balloon program. They're saying they're going to bring internet to the entire world, launching balloons up into where the jet stream is in the thermosphere, and that these balloons will have the capability to have some sort of propulsion systems on them to move them from one layer to another layer to provide communications, meaning that they will stay along the jet stream which goes around the world, or the thermosphere. They'll be moving at high speeds, providing telecommunications, internet, radio operations, all of that. They'll be out of sight. You won't be able to see these. The guy on Google says the only way you'll be able to see these is with a high-powered telescope. But get this. At nighttime, you don't see these balloons. All you see is the actual device itself being reflected. And if it's at 150,000 feet, your naked eye and your telescope is going to tell you, wait a minute, that's a satellite coming overhead. But you don't see the tether, because the tether is a specific color that can't be seen at night. That's why when they do these orbital paths, they make sure they need to know the lunar cycle. They need to make sure that whatever they got up in the air, no one will ever see it pass in front of the moon, because then you'd see the tether. You'd see the balloon.
Yeah, but that's really, I've thought about exactly what you're saying. The problem with that becomes this. It would be some pretty advanced calculations, because you would have to assume that if I was still in San Diego looking at the moon and they knew for a fact Crow was out there every night with his telescope, which I used to be, that they don't want Crow filming this, so they would calculate that. But now fast forward to someone in Houston, Texas. That's a whole different line of sight. How difficult would it be to try to block every line of sight all the way across the country? You see what I'm getting at? It would be near impossible, it seems.
Yeah, but if you recorded the moon for as long as you can remember, you know that it has a set path. So you basically design these assets to take a path to avoid the moon during specific operational times.
Right. Well, I got to be honest with you. I've filmed a lot of odd things. Even the thing I call the boomerang, which to me clearly looks like it's being controlled in some way. A lot of people have said it looks like 3 balloons tied together in some way. Were we talking about some other thing that had to do with balloons as well earlier?
Yeah, well, I was talking about how they were launching the satellites up, and the issue that we were talking about with regard to the moon, when you were talking about the lunar wave.
Yep.
I take the lunar wave as it's literally a heat wave that the moon, because of where the moon is.
In the thermosphere.
It's in the thermosphere. So
right.
I went away from the idea of it being in liquid, because superfluid liquid helium brought down to almost absolute zero. Absolute zero, close to absolute zero, doesn't exist up in the thermosphere. Only the beginning, the end of the mesosphere, where the temperature is minus 50 degrees Celsius. So I got rid of the idea that area, that's where the moon was, based on the distance. And but could it be at higher altitudes? It is a possibility that space, there's a because I was asked this question by one anatomy. He says, well, what kind of densities are you talking about if you're thinking that dark matter could actually be superfluid helium at absolute zero? And this is what scientists are trying to figure out right now. What is dark matter? They actually termed it dark fluid. There's literally a physics website that actually described dark matter, aka dark fluid. And then they've done an experiment with superfluid helium in a research-controlled experiment environment, and they injected particles inside the helium to almost absolute zero, and they fired a laser inside, and you see all of these little starlight kind of things inside the superfluid helium. I did a video comparison, okay, with STS footage of showing space with things flying by because they turn on that infrared camera.
Yeah.
And I put it side by side with the superfluid helium experiment that was conducted at the University of Maryland. And people who saw the video says they couldn't tell the difference of what was space and what was in the laboratory.
Wow. You know, it's funny you should mention that because, I mean, starting in like the end of the 90s, they started publishing on all like their sky and telescope that 85% of the space was missing, and they kept calling it dark matter. So it almost, you got to wonder if this is going to become the excuse when they finally divulge that it is liquid or whatever it is, you know, that they were fooled.
Well, NASA's considering it. I talked to them about it, and they said, hey, what kind of densities are you talking here, Robert? When they said that, that means that I came up with an idea that they're actually wanting to entertain. Because they don't know.
Well, that's further evidence that they've never been above low Earth orbit, though, again.
Well, here's the thing. When I asked if there were temperature sensors on the ISS, and she didn't know, and I said, well, what do you think the temperatures are? She says to me, minus 200 and plus 200. I'm like, okay, well that has to be that's in the thermosphere. That's where the moon could be. And that's when I knew right then and there, this is going to be blown out of the water.
Well, that's the other thing. If the moon was truly, you know, marked at 99 miles away, there's more evidence that no one ever walked on it, because that means it's freaking tiny. You know, it wouldn't classify as a planetary body or even the moon of a planetary body. It would be basically a small meteorite. Think about it. If it's 99 miles away, how big would it be? I mean, you could probably do the math to estimate what a half a degree of sky that we see is at 99 miles. But my point would be, is it would be nowhere near the size we're told, which is what, 1/4 the size of Earth or something like that?
Yeah.
So none of it works. I mean, if you logically take it down, but you know, I'll stand on that to the day I die. The moon just simply is not as far as we've been told, and some of the data that you're uncovering here totally backs that. And Brian Mullen, the engineer, you know, he's all about the thermosphere, and his work with the thermosphere is very close to what you're saying, but he has come to the conclusion that it's probably liquid. I think he labeled it as H2O. But I mean, if any of what we're talking about is true, what it means is NASA's inception was for the express purpose of lying to us and ensuring that we know nothing about what is called space. That's as clear as day, because for them to have landed anything on a comet, they've had to go through all that space. For them to have gone to the moon, they can't discover a new Van Allen belt, which they did a few years ago, because they've already been through the Van Allen belt like 9 times. You see, all these logical deductions we can make based on the data they have given us prove the fraud in my mind. I mean, at this point, what you just told me about balloons blows my mind, because you have a 1-to-1 matching algorithm of balloons matching an oscillation rhythm that has already been shown that the ISS oscillates in the same way, right? To me, that is mind-blowing. So I have to ask you, along with everything else you've said, do you accept that do you accept that there are 10 to 20,000 satellites orbiting in space?
Not where they classify space, possibly, but all on balloons.
So that would be under the thermosphere in our atmosphere.
I'd say on the edge of the thermosphere, because they do have balloons the size of football fields that can go to, from what someone told me, they can go to almost 1,000 miles. I don't know how big that would need to be, but I know that Echo 1 was launched on a rocket. The rocket reached its limit. Echo 1 kept kept going, and then a balloon 135 meters wide actually deployed, and Echo 1 stayed up in the air on a balloon for almost 8 years.
Did you ever see any images of that thing? Do you have any
Yeah,
idea
yeah,
what
they show
what
the
color
vintage
is it?
footage.
What color is it?
It's a silver color.
So it would reflect light.
Yeah, well, not only would it reflect light, but the Air Force actually described it in their radio announcement. This will be the first time that man has communicated a signal from the ground to a man-made moon. That's what they said.
Wow, I didn't know anything about that, but my point would
Yeah.
be my equipment would easily see something like that without even using an eyepiece, just using the scope as a camera lens. I
Yeah.
could easily see that. As a matter of fact, my telephoto would see that. That's crazy, man. It goes to show, so many people have contacted me over the years, asking me about telescopes, saying they want to get into it, what system is the best, and all these things. But I would point out, just based on the things we've talked about here, anyone getting a decent set of optics, even a telescope that's 4 inches or so, and just scanning the daytime sky has the potential to gather incredible data. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, we're talking, how big was that balloon again? 134?
They said it was 135 meters across.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah, it's huge. They show pictures of it. Just type in Echo 1.
Yeah,
They show the side. It takes up it literally takes up most of the space inside of a large blimp hangar.
Yeah, I take notes as I do this because I try not to get too much keyboard tapping. I noticed in a few of my shows all you can hear is keyboard tapping, and that's kind of sucks. But is there anything else you want to cover? Do you think there are some other critical things we should touch on? And let's take a minute to talk about the lunar wave and your concepts of it. I know we touched on it basically when I first met you on the phone to see if this would be a good fit to do this show. As you know, because I know that you had been following my work for some time, I initially tried to use the language of hologram and quickly realized that was absolutely the wrong way to go. Switched over to using the word facade and then discovered that was absolutely the wrong way to go. And now, and for some time now, I have been describing what I believe the moon to be as emanating something that emanates its own light and is not a rock in orbit. You had some interesting ideas earlier, and I thought you were going to be leaning towards some kind of liquid in the thermosphere as a cause of the wave, but it sounds like that may not be where you're at. So, I mean, you've seen the wave. It's a thing that covers the moon, always in pairs.
Yeah.
What
Well,
are
here's the
your
thing.
thoughts?
I'm thinking two things here. That it's definitely a heat wave, and it potentially, if someone else is doing it, I think that it possibly could be created artificially. If someone were looking through it through a camera or telescope, you could put an artificial heat source, like say a cup of tea or something like that, under the actual lens.
In the telescope?
No, not in the telescope, but maybe get a heat source right next to the telescope that would actually, like, say, a heat gun,
Well,
and put it across the telescope, and you.
Yeah,
I haven't done it, but I'm just saying.
I gotta stop you right there because what
I'm
I
not
have
saying-
what
I
I
didn't say
have
you,
used.
I'm just saying the one that you got from that one individual.
Well, wait a minute. Let me just describe this. I use an SCT, Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, as do a number of the other people who have shot the wave. The problem here is with a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, I can put my whole head in front of my telescope, and all you see is a dimming of the light. So many people looked at footage that I had shot and said that's a bug on your lens, and they don't understand how the Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes work, where it's not possible to see anything that close to the telescope. As a matter of fact, things are not even in focus until they're many, many miles away. But a bug or my hand or even my whole head in front of my telescope when it's focused on, say, the moon, you don't see a head, you don't see anything except a slight dimming because my head's so big it blocks a lot of light. And it's not even the dimming you would expect from seeing a whole head in front of an 8. First I used an 8, now I use an 11-inch aperture. You can still see the damn moon with my whole head in front of the front aperture. So I would just suggest that anyone who's using that kind of system, there is no physical possible way to put anything in or around the scope to get that effect. And not only that, in the 2012 footage, the wave is filmed as it begins, the telescope pans above the wave, and then the wave catches up to the telescope, which is also kind of demonstrating that it is filming something, but as I just described, it couldn't be generated in that way. It would have to be software faked or something like that, I think. I don't.
There's a possibility. I'm still researching this, Crow. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I mean, I'm coming up with not theories, but viable and plausible possibilities. I am sticking to the fact that the upper atmospheres. I'm not sure what layer there could superfluid helium is there because it's zero viscosity. Zero viscosity, meaning that if you dropped a bowling ball in a pool of this, you wouldn't know what you dropped it in.
It would be completely invisible.
It would be invisible, and the bowling ball would just all of a sudden stop. And you'd be like, what's just stopped it? You wouldn't know what it was.
Would the bowling ball go into it and be surrounded by it?
It would be surrounded by it, but you wouldn't see that. You wouldn't see any wave. You wouldn't see any viscosity type of behavior.
Right.
See, when they did these experiments, they said that, there's these existing quantum vortices, like hurricanes, whirlpools, all moving in one direction. It's not behaving like traditional liquid does at almost 0 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not behaving that way. I thought maybe the moon could be in this. No, the moon's not. The sun's not. But somewhere in one of our layers of our atmosphere, that environment exists. That environment exists.
And why do you think that's correct?
Well, I started matching it up with what they're finding out with regard to dark matter and dark fluid. They when they started calling it dark fluid, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. What else could be combined with this to make it completely black? Where literally, because look, Vanta Black was created by Surrey Nanosystems. They created this substance out of carbon nanotubes, which absorbs 99.96% of all visible light. Astronauts claim when they get at altitude, even when you go up in a balloon, you look up at the sky, all you see is what you believe to be the sun, but you don't see the billions of stars they say that you can see from the ground, from the surface of the Earth. Now the stars, I'm sticking to my claim that the stars are actually within a specific layer of our atmosphere, because when you go up in a balloon, you don't see any stars above you. You don't see no stars below you. So they're somewhere down lower, but not reflecting outward. They're reflecting downward. The stars are reflecting downward. And they're fixed, which means they might not even be stars at all. Yeah, they're flickering, but so does a giant diamond from a distance as well.
Right. Well, I think these are valid points. I think there's so much work being done that begins to show the idea that something's 1,000 light years or 100,000 light years. It's ridiculous. It's this construct that steals your ability to locate your place in the scheme of things. It becomes so overwhelmingly big, you can't get your arms around it, and you become powerless to understand your place in the scheme of things. Wherein, if they are truly lights and the moon is only within 100 miles of us, or the stars are a layer, which many artists are claiming is true, because we don't see the distance between them change as they change their apparent position. From our point of view, many artists are claiming that proves they're on a 2D plane. But I mean, are we talking about the same dark matter that started cropping up in the late 90s, where they claimed that some 80 or 90% of the known universe was made of this missing material called dark matter?
Yeah, and that's interesting you say that, because that's the claim of how much water is on Earth, about 70%. And that's how much water is actually in the human body, about 70%. So I could see where Brian's going, that it's got to be some sort of water fluid type environment. But when you look at the science of fluid dynamics and start studying that, superfluid helium makes more sense than water, because when you're talking about high altitudes, water vaporizes and boils at high altitudes. It boils. So it can't be that type of water, and maybe it's just some sort of denser type of fluid environment, but the denser type of fluid environment would be superfluid helium.
Now, can superfluid helium be brought back to its gaseous form?
Yeah, it can. You just let it basically come back to ambient room temperature.
So you would be thinking, or I would be thinking, that if in fact there was a layer up there that was made of this substance, they'd be mining it.
That's true.
You know, it seemed like a logical thing. I mean, they made up this whole silly story about helium-3 on the moon, and that, you know, a teaspoonful could power Paris for 100 years or some ridiculousness. That was one of the stories they put forward about the moon. But I wanted to, I had a note here that I didn't ask you as you were talking about it. You know, a lot of people have been talking about this company that can make artificial stars. Do you know what the stated purpose is for making artificial stars? Do you know why they claim they're doing it? What the function is?
You know, that's interesting. I'm still looking into that too. I know two companies that can do it. The Obayashi Corporation and Ale in Japan.
Yeah.
They create artificial light shows, suns, distant. They can create distant suns and distant planets.
So
in the sky.
Does it seem like it's like an entertainment thing, or
it's an entertainment thing? But ready for this? They partnered up with the U.S. Strategic Space Command back in the 50s.
There you go.
You can be guaranteed the U.S. gave them the technology, and they said they can do it anywhere in the world. You just pay them somewhere between $9,250 per star, and literally, if you wanted a shooting star light show over your house tonight, they just give them the longitude and latitude, and they send this thing up, and they'll do it for you.
Now, so that's like a meteor shower. Do they also do fixed bodies that would appear to be?
They do fixed bodies. They can create distant suns and distant planets and distant everything.
You know,
they say it on their website. They say it.
I'll tell you, you know, I got to make this comment. All these people who are interested in getting a telescope right now, you could contribute by simply going and getting images from the modern era now of the night sky and going back to images that were supposedly taken in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s and doing meticulous comparisons. I have often wondered, when I began to think about the lunar wave, think that I had already come to the conclusion the moon is not nearly as far away as we've been told, that it wouldn't be possible for a human being to set foot on it in the first place. This is my view. I began to consider, was it always like this? Or was there a change at some point? And when you begin to consider a company that could make a false sun in the sky or a false planet or a false star, you've really got to be questioning what truly would be behind the need to do this at all.
You know, that's what I ask myself. Why would they need to create fake anything? I mean, why would somebody want to pay that kind of money to do that? And the only logical explanation I can come to is nothing is real. I put up a video talking about the simulated universe. Nothing is real. You got astrophysicists and theoretical physicists and philosophers on a stage together talking about the very science they're pushing in our faces, and then they're questioning themselves. Could what we be doing be real, or are we just making this up? And quantum strings, and he believes that we're living in a computer simulation. Why, if you're a theoretical physicist and you're an astrophysicist and you make your money and your life on telling people, yeah, that's Venus, that's Saturn, and then you're going to tell me that there's a possibility that none of that is real? I'm sorry. It was so comical. That's why I made a joke out of it and putting up that video, because it completely contradicts the whole idea of astrophysics even existing, period.
Well, you know, I'll tell you what, man. In the last few months, I've been shot so many videos. There's some really kind of astounding work being done on the fake Pulse nightclub shooting. People making calls similar to the one you made. When I first heard, you know, I'd been sent the video a few times, finally saw a mirrored version of your phone call with the Sophia guy. And I said to myself, if this is legit, this is really a milestone. This is a marker that begins to demonstrate that people with good, strong science educations are now challenging what we have been handed. And if that continues to progress, where more Brian Mullards and more Robert Bassanos come and do what you guys have started, the frauds that we see, the lies that we see will not hold up. They cannot hold up. They will all die under the weight of their own details. And so that is really, why I went straight away to see if I could locate you, to see if I could talk to you. And I want people to go to Robert's channel and listen to that recorded conversation, that telephone conversation between Robert and the 23-year whatever flight director, whatever his title is at SOFIA, the 747 platform for telescopes. The way that you held that conversation and how you held your own on a scientific level and how you held your own with a man of NASA who's probably very well versed in some mathematics that most of us will never even think about. But what's more is the whole time I'm expecting you to just say, this is BS, this is fraud, and you don't do it. You go all the way 20 some minutes into that call before you finally say, I've come to the conclusion that the Hubble Space Telescope does not exist and that SOFIA has been taking all the images. And I was just like, you know what? I wanted to stand up and applaud, because I don't watch movies anymore, so I don't have anything to applaud for. I do watch movies, but I think you catch my drift. But I would just say thank you for recording that and having the fortitude as a science-based individual, having the guts to stand up and challenge what other scientists supposedly have put forward as truth. We're coming to the end of the second hour here. Is there anything you would like to cover before we call this an episode?
No, not really. I mean, if people want to take a gander at what I put out, it's not for all audiences, especially for those who are 18, 17 or younger. It's for mature audiences only, most of the content. I did put out some videos specifically for families regarding some literature that was put out in 1929 titled, they did some research on a bunch of children. It's called Children's Concept of the World. And these kids were asked to describe the world they live in, and the responses were absolutely incredible. They were actually far more complex and advanced than PhDs working at NASA. One kid actually described, a 9-year-old, says, how do you believe the sun actually works? And he says, I believe the sun drops through from Europe down below, and the sun sets and it goes through a hole to the center and lights up the rest of the other side of the planet. And I was like, whoa, that was the most interesting thing I ever heard. And they actually showed a picture of what that model would look like. And it was a flat plane surface where the sun literally went around in a circle around the top layer and dropped through somehow into the bottom layer to light up the lower layer. And then somehow it found its way back around and come back up on top again.
Wow.
How about that?
Wow.
Yeah, so that's for a family to review. There were actually social science research studies done. But the rest of the videos, I'm putting them together in such a way to lead up to that one big reveal. Because I found out yesterday that every single government agency, aerospace company, they use a particular mathematical model titled FEM, Flat Earth Model. NASA has this science in their software applications. They use it all the time. They discuss it, the National Reconnaissance Office. And I asked finally yesterday to have it clarified, and the guy told me at the SOHO team, he says, yeah, we use that mathematics because it refers to a fixed frame of reference that we can use to study everything else. And I said, wait a minute, so you're saying fixed frame of reference, so you're saying the only thing you know is the ground you walk on. And you have to use this math because there's no science for spherical math.
That's comedy.
And that's basically what he's confirming, that there's no science for spherical math. Is there curvature to the Earth? I believe so. My model that I've agreed with, that I've found out based on the International Ellipsoid Reference System, is that the Earth is undergoing flattening. Okay, it's undergoing continual flattening, which to me, if the outer atmospheres are rotating at high speeds consistently, when you look at that from a centrifugal standpoint, eventually it starts to change shape and you increase the pressure. So there's increased pressure being put on the planet. If you get at a specific altitude, you're going to see the outer curvature based on a 23.5 degree or 24 degree tilt. And that's why you see that. People say it's because of fisheye lenses and yada yada. No. No one has ever seen the Earth with their own eyes, unaided by an optical object at high altitude.
That's right.
Why is that? Because we're being told that if you go up at high altitude like that and you don't have anything covering your eyes or your face, you will implode. That's what they're telling us. So they've scared the hell out of us and telling us, no, you people can't go there. We need to go there in special vehicles, special aircraft. And I'm sorry, but we can't take you up there to see this. You're just going to have to trust us. And, you know, Mr. Picard did it. And he saw something. But a lot of his information is being suppressed. They don't want anyone to know. They don't want anyone to know. The Earth can't be 25,000 miles in circumference from the equator. I believe that's the internal structure of the land masses. That's not the entire Earth. I believe it to be much larger, because if they really are giving us a view at 200 plus miles, they never show you the entire Earth.
No, you're never gonna. And not only that, we know that a Mercator projection map warps the size and actual shape of a continent. Many people have said it was because the ruling class in Europe wanted their tiny countries to look better. Some people have said it was done so we had straight navigation lines for ships. But what I can tell you is most people are not aware that, you know, like Greenland is something like actually in square miles 3 times or 4 times, I forget what it is, bigger than Africa. But what we see is when we look at the Mercator projection of something like South America and then look at the snapshot of Earth from supposedly Apollo 17, they look pretty close. So how is that possible? It's not possible. But anyhow, my friend, I want to thank you so much for coming on. Please quickly tell people your YouTube channel. We got to wrap up for the top of the hour.
My YouTube channel is PLANATE VERITAS. It's actually PLANATE VERITAS, VERITAS. If you search it on YouTube, you have to enter it in all capital letters. It's the Latin term for flat plane truth.
All right, man. Hey, Robert, thank you so much for having the fortitude to record that call with the NASA gentleman. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I give everyone the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I give those guys respect. You know, they might have learned some things new that they didn't know about and start questioning things. But I do learn a tremendous amount from them. And because I've been trying to ask these questions on the university level, and I'm not getting definitive and conclusive answers that can be accepted.
Well, you know, I thought I was learning a lot from NASA over the years, and if I could offer to teach them one thing, it would be this: go get your crash helmets, because the huge lies you have been telling us are going to come crashing to Earth pretty quick.
Yeah.
But anyhow, my friend, that covers probably what will be episode 13 on CROW777 Radio, and I will be in touch and monitoring your channel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll be doing the same. Take care, Crow.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. I just want to do